the Chinese actually had this really, really fierce general called Nie Shicheng. Nie Shicheng is he's famous for dying a really tragic death in the Boxer Rebellion in a few years after, but we'll get into that later. But he was very fierce. He was so fierce, you could actually tell his mother was just as fierce. His mother would wrestle with like teenagers in her 70s. So that the blood is in the Nair family. So they're fighting, but he was losing, and then the head of the army in Korea, Ye Zhichao, would not provide reinforcement, and so Nair fled, and so did Ye, and they went to Pyongyang. And in Pyongyang, they had a fort as protection. The army was around the same. They were fighting the Japanese. The Japanese, actually, if you read their side of the story, if they could not get it in 2 days, they would leave. The Japanese, you look at the whole strategy of the Sino-Japanese war, again, it's very similar to the Russo-Japanese war and very similar to the Pacific War against America, is I'm going to do a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And if I can get more, I'll do more. If I can get more, I'll do more. So the whole point was, the original point was to get Seoul, and then if they could get the rest of Korea, they would try. And so this is one of those gambling things. They would try. So if they cannot get Pyongyang in 2 days, they would go back. But after a day and a half, the Chinese just fled. And this always boggled my mind, because by that point, this is not the Opium War. The Chinese artillery is actually just as good as the Japanese. The numbers were about the same. You've got the fort. Why would you lose? And fortunately for me, there was an example that's pretty much exactly the same that could explain all of this, and that was the World Cup. The Brazilians lost to the Germans 7-1. In terms of skills, it's about the same. If not, the Brazilians a bit better. But it's always about organization. And Japan has already completely revolutionized the army to a very modern army. For example, the heavy artillery, the light artillery, the cavalry, and then also a really, really good medical support as well, both for the humans and for the horses. Well, the Chinese, actually, if you look at how this army was organized. More of the army actually came from Huai, because they all worked for Li Hongzhang. So they're not the national army. They're a little bit like a bunch of gangsters. So for example, like, let's say this army group of 1,000 people. What's the name? It's not whatever infantry 5th battalion. It's not like this. It would be something like, oh, they're the Corleones. Or the Tatalias, right? It's actually, they always use the middle name of they always use the middle name of whoever the general was. And so within that, there will be a bunch of, the heavy artillery, light artillery. There's absolutely no organization whatsoever. So when they fought, and also because you're not fighting for your country, you're just fighting for your boss. And if there's not much in it for you, your ability to fight is actually very low. That's why during the Taiping Rebellion, the Huai army was very strong, because once you get into Nanjing, you can rob, you can do whatever you want. But in this case, there's not a lot of incentive to really win.
So it wasn't like a clan necessarily.
It wasn't like a clan. It was serious, like gangsters, like basically gangs.
Are they well paid? So there'll be a lot of mercenaries there, or is it just?
They're mercenaries, so they're not very well paid. So, but the Chinese government has a very interesting system. They de facto let you loot your own people. So that's how they get a pay rise. So they lost, and they fled all the, and then so Korea is gone. So the whole Korea, it's in the hands of the Japanese.
So up until that point, it had been a vassal state.
It's a vassal state. It's a vassal state.
When did that start, actually?
So the Ming Dynasty is the beginning of the Ming Dynasty. When the Ming Dynasty was founded and when they took the northern China, Korea automatically became a vassal state to the Ming. The Ming saved Korea against the Japanese, against Sino-Japanese in the 1590s.
Is that 1644?
1644 is when the Qing. So what happened? What happened in 1630? 1300s to 1644. What happened in the 1630s was that when the Qing emperors who were from here, they were just a small clan here, were fighting the Ming. The Ming invaded the Manchurians, and the Koreans helped. And so, obviously the Manchurian won, and when the Manchurians won, they punished Korea for helping the Ming, and so they invaded Korea. And so after they invaded Korea, then Korea became a vassal state of the Qing. So Ming was, for the Ming, the Koreans was voluntary. For the Qing, it was they lost.
Is it fair to call it almost like a colony of China?
It's not a colony because nobody moved there. No, it's
just pay us
tribute. The closest thing is like one country, two systems,
yeah.
Because you're not really involved in any of the domestic affairs.
They have their own currency.
They have their own. It didn't really matter. They have their own thing.
Yeah.
It's only when it comes to foreign policy and defense, and national defense. That's when China comes into play. Just like now.
So
Just like
the vassal state, they're not
there's a-
allowed to have their own standing army? Or
Yeah, they could have their own standing army, but it's kind of like policemen in Hong Kong. Like we probably
What did China get out of it?
nothing. Face.
Uh,
But again, it's very similar to Hong Kong, right? What does China really get out of Hong Kong, right? Face, right? So it's yeah. So
headaches and face.
headaches and face, but or like if you want face, there will be headaches,
Yeah.
right? So and so when
And so that's when Japan. Sorry, that's when Korea becomes a Japanese.
not yet. So in the war situation, China lost pretty much all of its control over Korea by this point. Yeah.
But at that time, then, with Korea not having a standing army, it was no resistance then.
Yeah, so the Korean army would not. It didn't matter. So it's the or like they. I think there was a little bit of putting up against the Japanese, but then it was effectively not possible to go against the Japanese, and because as they were fleeing, the Qing army was actually looting the Koreans, and so the Koreans went from pro-China to anti-China during the time, and so after Pyongyang, all of Korea was out of Chinese control, and the army was in Yalujiang, the Yalu River, and then the Chinese want to send more soldiers to Korea to fight, or at least the border to fight, and so because just now in Fengdao, the Japanese would just attack, they sent most of the fleet, 34,000 tons worth of the main fleet, including Dingyuan, Zhenyuan, the biggest ones, and took these soldiers, 4,000 soldiers, up to Korea. When they're on the way back, around noontime, suddenly at around 1 p.m., one of the sailors went to the admiral and said, "The Japanese is in sight." Actually, at that point in time, everybody spoke English to each other because that's where they learned naval instructions. So the Chinese naval officer went to the admiral and said, "The Japanese is in sight, sir." And so that was around 1 p.m. An hour earlier, the Japanese had already found the Beiyang fleet. The main Beiyang fleet is there. Who was the spy? Who gave it away? It was black smoke, because the Beiyang army, the Beiyang fleet, did not have enough money to buy good coal. So when they bought coal from Kaiping gave them the worst, and the worst coal was really black. So that's why the Japanese were like, wow, that's a lot of black smoke. So air pollution has always been the Achilles heel of China. So it's like, well, that's really bad black smoke. So they went, and then when they went, that's when the Qing, the Japanese fleet had about, so they're really the main stuff. The Japanese had all the main ships, 37,000 tons of ship. China's 34, also one of the main. And when they were fighting, the Chinese were slow. And Dingyuan, Zhenyuan were like this. And they were fighting. They were going straight. And then the Japanese fleet was like, actually, there's not enough space, but it's like this. At 6,000 meters, the Chinese fight first, because it's much bigger. The cannons were much bigger, but then it's really slow. So not only were the ships slow, the cannons were slow. The rule was 5 minutes per shot for the Chinese, and 5 shots per minute for the Japanese. So in the beginning when they were and so Yoshino was got hit first, and then but the Japanese were fast, so they keep on coming, coming up until 3,000 meters. They start firing. So they're firing. Quite immediately, Ding Yuan got into got hit. The admiral was injured because the Japanese the Chinese the cannons board like shoot and it doesn't explode, but the Japanese one, once it explodes, actually there's fire that just goes around and around that lasts for a long time. So Ding was injured. Ding was injured, and then Ding Yuan. So this is very confusing. The Ding Yuan admiral's name is Ding, but it's a different Ding. So there's when that happened, Zhi Yuan, whose captain was Cantonese, actually is a national hero from Canton. One of the greatest captains within the fleet. At that point in time, if you could hit your accuracy is about 10%, it's already very good. And so for Beiyang, there was in a few years before 1894, there was if you fire 16 shots, 3 would pass, 5 it's excellent. Deng, like Deng Xiaoping, the Deng hit 14. So it's one of the greatest. But then there wasn't enough artillery. And so he's done with all his artillery. So what he did was, and he got hit. So what he did was he would slam into Yoshino. He slammed into, but then a bomb hit one of the engines, and so it sunk. And so when he died, actually, this is a very Hollywood movie thing. His dog actually tried to save him in the water, and he wouldn't let his dog save him, so he died, and the dog died with him. So it's a very hard. But then the war continued. Each side, and then China, actually all the artillery is gone because again they haven't bought anything since 1888,
Where
right?
on the map are we not?
We would be around here. Would be around here. So Fengdao is here. This is around here. On the way back, and so but then the Ding Yuan and Zhen Yuan were really big. They were 7 tons, right? So the Japanese realized that they couldn't get it down. So get them down. So the Japanese actually left first around 6 p.m. because it was dark. The Chinese had five of the ships actually sunk. Japanese 5 of the ships were actually badly injured. China had no, especially like Ding Yuan, had no more artillery, no more bombs left. For example, Yoshino still have 1,251 shots. The Chinese fleet got hit 754 times. The Japanese fleet got hit 134 times. But the Japanese accuracy was 12%. Chinese was 20%. So the Chinese side is actually so a lot, because a lot of people like to talk about the lack of discipline of the Navy. But if you look at the objective data, you could say that the Navy is actually of very high quality. It's just that it wasn't supported by the authorities. And so that's the major naval battle. And when naval battle, they all went back to Dalian because they needed to fix the ships. And at the same time, the Japanese were landing on Lushun because they were thinking, okay, I badly injured your fleet, so the best thing is, and then because Korea is ours, and then they're fleeing, and so the best way is to land on Lushun, and the army going across the Liaodong Peninsula, and to destroy if we could destroy the whole of the Beiyang army, then this door will be open. And so they landed, and then they were fighting. It's again a ground battle again, and they just keep on beating. Exactly the same situation. Partly it's because the Chinese army, there were certain army groups. There were the general with the Manchurian. Some were the Huai from Anhui. So there was no centralized communication or centralized commander on the whole situation. So this group died and whatever, this group died and whatever. And then there was this battle where the Chinese won a little battle and then decapitated all of the Japanese soldiers' heads. And so the Japanese, when they took over Lushun, had the first massacre on China that lasted for 3 days, for 4 days and 3 nights. And the whole of Lushun, there were only 36 people left to take care of the corpse. Later they found 800, so about 20,000 people died. Men, women, kids, all of that. So that was one of the first massacres that the Japanese had on the Chinese. And they took over Fengtian as well, which is now Liaoning, Shenyang. And Shenyang is very important. Shenyang is where the beginning of the Qing Dynasty, right? So all of this, it got took over by the Japanese very quickly. And so when that happened, they also started landing in Shandong. Why is that? It's because Ding Rutang, the admiral, knew that if all of this land has been taken over by the Japanese, it's not safe anymore. The Japanese were landing here, but then because all their ships were badly injured, they couldn't go out and fight. So they sailed back to Weihai. It's safer there with more forts here.